Donald Trump has once again shaken the transatlantic alliance to its core, agreeing to peace talks with Vladimir Putin without Ukraine, without NATO, and crucially without Europe. And the EU's response, a forceful insistence that NATO and Europe, that Ukraine and its European allies must be involved in any peace negotiations. But in true Trumpian fashion, the former president seems poised to ignore that demand, raising profound questions about the future of European security, NATO cohesion, and the UK's role on the global stage. The reaction in London has been nothing short of apoplectic. And the blunt assessment from UK defence figures, the bastards are going to do this, captures the sense of betrayal among British officials who have spent years backing Ukraine. The Defence Secretary John Healey minced no words. There can be no negotiation without Ukraine, about Ukraine without Ukraine. But Trump, with his characteristic disregard for diplomatic protocol, has already announced that his team will begin talks with Putin, probably in Saudi Arabia. For Westminster, this represents the first major diplomatic crisis in a post-Brexit world order. Under Keir Starmer's Labour government, the UK has attempted to reassert its leadership in European security, strengthening its commitment to NATO, doubling down on Ukraine's support, yet Trump's actions threaten to undermine Britain, reducing it to an observer rather than an active player. That's the result of Brexit. The emerging consensus is that Trump's negotiations will entail territorial concessions by Ukraine, effectively locking in Russian control of Crimea and parts of the Donbass. More worryingly, there are indications that Trump's team sees NATO membership for Ukraine as off the table, a position that directly contradicts the alliance's stated commitment to Kyiv's long-term security. This has set alarm bells ringing across Westminster. The UK, alongside its European partners, has pledged that Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, but Trump's pivot could render these commitments meaningless. For NATO's allies, the great fear is that Trump's deal will be another Minsk III. It will be a Minsk III, another short-term settlement that freezes the conflict rather than ending it, allowing Russia to regroup and strike again in the future, and commentators on the bottom of YouTube videos to say, what about Minsk? What about Minsk? Well, there are other agreements that preceded Minsk, and Minsk was an agreement reached effectively with a gun to the head. The Minsk 1 and 2. The EU has responded with an ultimatum. Any peace deal must involve Ukraine and Europe, but here lies the uncomfortable truth. Europe is not in a position to dictate terms to Trump. Despite French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu warning of a NATO moment of reckoning, and German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius calling Trump's preemptive concessions to Putin regrettable, the reality is that Europe remains deeply reliant on the US for security. While European nations have increased their military spending, their ability to influence Trump is limited. He's made clear that the US will no longer foot the bill for Ukraine's defence, calling on Europe to shoulder the overwhelming share of military aid. Even UK Defence Secretary Healey, while maintaining a tough stance, acknowledged a shifting burden. We know our responsibilities. We are doing more of the heavy lifting. For Sir Keir Starmer, this is a defining moment. He faces a stark choice. Does he align closely with the EU's pushback against Trump, reinforcing the UK's commitment to Ukraine, or does he attempt to maintain a working relationship with the US president, even if that means softening the UK's stance? Starmer's government has so far taken the European line, backing Ukraine's NATO ambitions and warning against a premature settlement that rewards Russian aggression. But the reality is that the UK has limited leverage over Trump. If the EU's ultimatum fails to sway him, Starmer may soon have to make a difficult calculation: resist Trump's deal outright, or grudgingly accept the new global reality. Beyond Ukraine, this episode has profound implications for NATO alliance, for the NATO alliance, and Trump has already suggested that he would not automatically defend NATO members who fail to meet their spending targets. Now, by moving ahead with peace talks that Europe strongly opposes, he's testing the very foundations of Western unity. For Britain, the stakes couldn't be higher. A Trump presidency that dismisses European security concerns, that leaves the UK exposed, forces it to navigate an uncertain world with fewer allies and less influence, The great question looming over Westminster is whether Starmer and his government have the diplomatic skill to manage this crisis, or whether they will find themselves relegated to the sidelines of a world order increasingly dictated by Trump and Putin.